Full Service Radio is proudly supported and hosted by Simplecast, the easiest way for a podcast creator to publish and distribute audio on the internet. For more information, visit simplecast.com. Recorded live from the lobby of the Line Hotel in Adams Morgan, Washington, D.C.
Welcome to Black Girl Missing, a podcast that covers stories of Black girls who were reported missing when they were under the age of 18. We're exercising caution and social distancing while recording for you from our homes in D.C. and the Jersey Shore. And this podcast is brought to you by Full Service Radio. Due to the sensitive and sometimes graphic nature of these cases, we advise listeners to use caution when listening. Black Girl Missing is supported in part by New Voices for Reproductive Justice. New Voices for Reproductive Justice is a social change organization dedicated to the health and well-being of Black women, femmes, and girls. I'm Asa.
And I'm Nikki. And Feminista Jones is off this week. How are you feeling, Asa? You good?
Yeah, I'm better than previous weeks.
Good.
Yay. How are you doing?
Good. I'm okay. I mean, it's kind of gloomy and like ugly outside, but other than that, I'm maintaining. I'm good.
Grand. I feel like that's a good thing right now.
It's better than bad.
Yeah, bare minimum is really good at this point.
I'm not terrible, so that helps.
Yes.
So we're going to get started. We open each show reviewing cases of girls who are currently missing that we call the Aisha Alert. We encourage you to pay close attention, check our social media, and help us help the families who are still seeking answers and long for their loved ones' safe return. We like to note that we create these lists of currently missing Black girls in real time. So by the time the podcast episodes are released, there may have been some changes. We'll have information on each case posted on our social media channel so that you can stay updated. First, we have Kiviana Coleman. She's a 14-year-old girl from Medford, New York. She was staying at her godmother's house located at 8 Heron Path in Coram, and was last seen when her godmother went to bed on Sunday, May 3rd at approximately 2:30 a.m. When her godmother woke up, she was not at the residence. Coleman's mother called police later that day at approximately 2:20 p.m. Police say she's believed to be with an acquaintance, Ryan Roderka, who's 20 years old, of Mastic Beach. Kiviana is described as Black, approximately 5 feet 2 inches tall and 120 pounds. She was last seen wearing a burgundy jacket, black jeans, and black sneakers. Detectives ask anyone with information on Kiviana's whereabouts to call the 5th Squad at 631-854-8552. Next, we have Sabrina Sumter. She is 16-year-old from West Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. She was last seen at about 6:30 p.m. on Saturday, May 2nd, on the 500 block of Cretan Street. Sabrina is 5 feet 4 inches tall, weighs 135 pounds, with a thin build, light brown complexion, hazel eyes, and black hair. Anyone who has information on her location is urged to contact the Southwest Detective Division at 215-686-3183. Kaylin Blakeney is a 14-year-old girl from Washington, D.C. Kaylin was last seen in the 1000 block of Maryland Avenue in Northeast D.C. on Saturday, May 2nd. Police say she was wearing black jeans, a black hooded shirt, and black tennis shoes. She is described as a Black female with a medium complexion. She's about 4'10" in height and weighs about 110 pounds with black hair and brown eyes. She may be with her sister, Carlisa Blakeney, who she often is a chronic runaway with, who's 14 years old. She's 4'7" in height and weighs about 130 pounds. Anyone with any information on the whereabouts of Kaylin or Carlisa are asked to contact the Metropolitan Police Department at 202-727-9009. Asa.
So now we're going to get into the case of the St. Louis Jane Doe. I'd like to put an extra trigger warning on this particular case just because some of the details are more graphic than we have discussed in previous episodes.
Okay.
I'd like to thank one of our listeners and Facebook followers, Jackson Janine, for suggesting this case for us today. The y'all suggesting cases has been a really great help because I hadn't heard of this before. So the case starts out on Monday afternoon of February 28th, 1983. Two rummagers were looking for scrap metal in the basement of an abandoned apartment building located at 5635 Clemens Avenue in St. Louis, Missouri. They stumbled upon the headless body of a Black girl that was estimated to be between the ages of 8 and 11 years old.
What?
Yeah. She was wearing a blood-stained yellow V-neck sweater with no tags, and she was positioned face down with her pants and underwear removed. Where her head had been decapitated, there was mold growing on her neck, which indicated her body may have been down there for some time.
Oh my gosh.
There were 2 coats of red nail polish on her fingers, and her hands were bound by the wrists with red and white nylon rope. The young victim would later be nicknamed the St. Louis Jane Doe, Hope, and Little Jane Doe. The homicide detectives Joe Bergen and Herb Riley were examining the crime scene initially, though they thought that she was a prostitute until they examined her body and realized she hadn't yet gone through puberty. They determined she was beheaded elsewhere, possibly by a large carving knife because of how clean the cut was, due to the lack of blood, and was discarded at a later time.
Oh my goodness.
They found some traces of blood on the side of the walls, leading to them to believe that she had been brought down into the basement. An autopsy conducted by Mary Case from St. Louis's medical examiner's office showed she had been raped, and her cause of death was by strangulation 3 or 5 days prior to being found. One thing that was noted was that she was well nourished, and outside of the evidence of her rape and murder, there were no signs of physical abuse or neglect. Despite an extensive search, her head was never recovered, which hindered the investigation because dental records couldn't be provided, nor facial reconstruction through forensic technology programming. But DNA, fingerprints, and footprints were able to be collected. The investigators scoured a list of all children at the surrounding schools, but everyone was accounted for. They also looked through the database of missing children, yet there were no reports of a young child matching her description being missing. She was ruled out as being 5 possible victims, ranging from several states, including a Jane Doe from Northampton County, North Carolina. At one point, detectives sought out assistance from a group of psychics who performed. Yes, they got that desperate. So they sought out a group of psychics who performed a seance.
Okay.
And I kind of feel like this wasn't that abnormal in like the 80s and early 90s, because I feel like that happened a lot. But also, you have to be really desperate to want to find the perpetrator of a crime.
Absolutely.
Which is also surprising because this is a little Black girl and we don't see folks going through this much trouble for little Black girls.
Absolutely not.
Yeah. Herb Riley gave them photos of Jane Doe's fingerprints, and as they passed the photocopies around, they all had the same conclusion. Her head would be located on a boat in the Gulf of Mexico, and they should immediately contact the Coast Guard. This lead was pursued in depth, but it proved a dead end.
Okay, hold on. Wait. So the question I have is, how did they all get to the same conclusion if they're not legitimate psychic? Like, if psychics aren't real, how did they all get to the same conclusion? Were they all in the same room together? Were they talking?
See, that wasn't made clear. They said that they passed the photocopies around, so it makes it seem like they were all in the same room, but that just could have been editorializing.
Right.
But I think I watched a little bit too much SVU, And these things are kind of easy to be faked.
Mm-hmm.
So
Okay.
I don't know.
Fair enough.
The lead went nowhere. So
Right. That's really what matters.
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry. Go ahead.
It's okay. Jane Doe's case quickly turned cold, and after 10 months of exhausting all possible leads and nobody coming forward to claim her body, she was buried in December 1983 at Washington Park Cemetery in Berkeley, Missouri. 10 years later, in 1993, investigators mailed her bloodstained sweater and nylon rope that bound her hands to another psychic residing in Florida for further analysis, but this was a fruitless endeavor because the evidence was lost in the mail delivery.
No.
Yes. Yes. In 1996, the original homicide detective, Herb Riley, passed away, and Jane Doe's case was one of the 2 cases he never solved during his tenure with the police department.
Mm-mm.
Another 10 years passed, and in June of 2013, investigators decided to exhume the child's remains with the hope of gathering new forensic evidence by modern advancements made in science and technology.
Okay, come on, Criminal Minds.
Yes, okay. But this task proved difficult because the cemetery she was buried in was unkempt. Her grave was unmarked, and many people were displaced because of insufficient care of the burial records.
Oh, no.
However, with the help of volunteers and the use of a photograph of the casket that had been taken on the day of her burial, they were able to locate her grave. Jane Doe's remains were unearthed and sent to the St. Louis Medical Examiner's Office, where researchers from the Smithsonian Institution and University of North Texas recalibrated bone sampling and minerals to attempt to narrow down her native origins based on the water she drank.
Oh, my goodness.
We just talked about this.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah, we did.
Yep. The testing revealed she had spent most of her life in one of numerous southeastern states, including Georgia, Mississippi, Arkansas, Texas, Tennessee, Florida, Louisiana, and North or South Carolina.
Okay.
Helpful.
It's a wide net, but it's a net.
It's much smaller than the whole continental U.S.
It's a net, and it excludes Missouri.
Yep. Though new sign testing provided a glimmer of hope to the child's case, the police say it's rather unlikely she'll properly be identified unless somebody actually comes forward with vital information. She is reburied in Calvary Cemetery on West Florissant Road in North St. Louis, Missouri, funded by the nonprofit organization Garden of Innocence. The list of suspects in her murder was very short. With lack of evidence, finding someone of interest was extremely difficult. The authorities suspected a family member may be involved due to no reports of a child being reported missing, but considering they were unable to determine where she was from, that theory was hard to substantiate. But there was one suspect that caught the eye of investigators: Vernon Brown. Vernon Brown was born October 1st, 1953. He had a very troubled upbringing, suffered excessive physical abuse from his grandfather, dropped out of high school, and in 1973, he was convicted of molesting a 12-year-old girl and subsequently spent 4 years in an Indiana prison. After his release, 9-year-old Kimberly Campbell disappeared under mysterious circumstances. She was later found raped and strangled in a vacant residence that was owned by Vernon's grandmother. Though he was considered a prime suspect in the case, there wasn't enough evidence to charge him. In 1985, Vernon relocated to Enright Avenue in St. Louis, Missouri, living under the false name Thomas Turner, where he was living with his wife and stepchildren. At approximately 3 p.m. on Friday, October 24th, 1986, He just arrived home from picking up his stepchildren from school. Afterward, he sat on the front porch watching other children walk home after they got off the school bus. That's when 9-year-old Janet Perkins, a student at Cole Elementary School, was walking home to her house that was a few blocks away. Vernon took notice, lured her into his home. His stepchildren saw her come inside, and he ordered them all into their bedrooms and locked their doors from the outside.
What on earth?
Yeah. That's a lot. Vernon led Janet down to the basement where he bound her feet and hands by using a wire coat hanger. Moments later, he strangled her with a rope. Vernon's stepchildren could hear her screaming and pleading for her life as her voice echoed through the air vents. He discarded the body and went about his day as if nothing ever happened.
What?
Yeah.
What?
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
Yeah.
hang on.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
My first concern with this Vernon Brown character is I'm assuming his wife had no idea what type of person he was.
That's the only thing I can wrap my head around.
Like she could,
especially
I really
since he changed his name and all of that. Like,
right.
I really, 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 really can't fathom anyone dating, then marrying, and also allowing this a convicted child molester and murderer to be
around
in
their
the
children.
presence of their own children.
Right.
So
I'm also curious about what happens when someone does the things that he's done. How are they able to then live under this false name? Like nobody was watching them. He wasn't on no probation. I feel like how are you able to go forth, not even a long time later, because this happened in 1973.
Yeah.
So you, a little over 10 years later, you have assumed a completely whole new life. How is that even possible?
Well, the St. Louis Doe murder was in 1983.
Yeah.
So it's
this is wild.
The only thing I can think of is because I feel like all those laws around like having to report as a sex offender or danger to children, I feel like I gotta look it up, but I don't think those were put in place until the 90s. Maybe.
Okay.
Because other than that, like, how, Sway?
How?
Yeah.
Okay.
Whew. So the following day, the police discovered 2 trash bags containing Janet's body in an alley behind his home.
I'm sorry. Sorry.
Mm-hmm.
Right behind the house?
Yep. Didn't even bother.
Kill the little girl and just put it right behind the house.
I mean, he didn't care. Like, he did it with his stepchildren in the home.
This leads me to another question. Mm-hmm. As a woman who dates men,
mm-hmm.
what type of personality does he have that you don't notice that he's probably a sociopath? Like, it makes me wonder what type of dynamic she had with this man that he...
I mean, like, with a whole bunch of sociopaths, like, they're able to hide it from the people they feel they need to hide it from.
This is crazy.
Like, I'm sure if you had asked her prior to her finding out about all this, mm-hmm. he was the perfect gentleman.
I want to talk to her. I'm sorry. Go ahead. I just want to ask some questions.
Just ask some questions. Okay. Let's see. Where was I? 2 days later, on Monday, October 27th, 1986, he was arrested. And a relative of a neighbor testified to seeing Janet enter his home. When questioned by detectives, he confessed to murdering Janet on videotape. Surprisingly, he admitted to murdering 19-year-old Sonetta Ford 1 year beforehand on March 7th, 1985. She was found strangled by an electrical cord and stabbed multiple times in an apartment basement where he had worked as a maintenance man. At at the time, the authorities arrested him for the murder, but he was let go after he gave homicide detectives a false alias. So him having multiple names seems to be a theme. While he was in prison in Bonne Terre, a homicide detective in St. Louis frequently visited and questioned him about other possible murders he may have committed, particularly asking him about the young Jane Doe found in 1983. He never confessed to her or anyone else's murder. Well, but detectives believe he could be involved with at least 20 unsolved homicide cases, but they don't have enough tangible evidence to conclusively prove their stance. And on Wednesday, May 18th, 2005, at 51, Vernon Brown was executed by lethal injection. The case of the St. Louis Jane Doe has never been solved and may have just, like, all chances of it being solved may have gone with him.
Okay, so one thing is sticking out for me is there is something that happens when it comes to society and people who show that they are predators. There have been multiple occurrences of this man doing things. And while I know that the time, like the chronologically, the time didn't really allow for the technological advances that we have now, there was nothing in place to keep tabs on this man. They weren't keeping track of him through fingerprints. They didn't. And one of my biggest questions is when somebody gives you a fake alias while you're being questioned for murder.
Yep.
Nobody thought to verify his identity. Like they didn't ask you for an ID. They didn't ask you for a social security card and nothing. Like they didn't ask you for anything.
Nope.
And also the presence of fingerprints was around back then.
Right. I just feel like part of why there's so many screw ups is because the criminal justice systems within each state don't really work together very well, and that's from back then to now. I'm just thinking of the case of the two adoptive mothers who killed their adopted children, and they were able to hop from state to state after they were reported to Child Protective Services because none of those states were able to communicate with each other effectively and efficiently.
Right. If you don't have like a federal system.
Exactly.
That's nationwide.
Yeah. So I feel like part of that was how he was able to slip through and create a whole new life in a new state without folks really, scrutinizing it.
Right. It also reminds me of the episode that we did about Georgia Lee Moses when I mentioned Polly Klaas, her disappearance. Her kidnapper literally got away by seconds because when the police put out a bulletin, it missed. He went over to the next town and it missed because they were on different radio channels. That's the only reason that they didn't catch him.
Right. So I think a huge reason so many cases go unsolved is because there is no, unless it becomes a federal crime and the feds get involved, there's no real connection within communication between states. Even like counties within the same states.
Right.
It takes forever to get information back and forth.
There's a real lack of connection when it comes to different jurisdictions. And then you have some places they'll have like a police force and then they'll also have the sheriff's office. And then some places they might also have state troopers. You have border towns like Detroit and El Paso, Texas, where in addition to police and sheriffs, you also have border patrol.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think people realize that, like, border towns, the United States Border Patrol, literally, they function as like another
A
type of
whole
police force.
entity. Yeah, they're a whole
Yeah,
separate entity.
like you can get pulled over by Border Patrol, and
Mm-hmm.
it's Homeland Security is a completely different section of government.
Yep.
And you don't know how much these people work in concert or how much they don't.
Right. And then there's always little petty squabbles within, like, I want this
Absolutely.
case. This is my jurisdiction. This is ours. This is us. This is this. It that hinders a lot of cases as well.
Absolutely. And so another thing I'm curious about with this Vernon Brown character is if all of his all of the times that he was caught,
Mm-hmm.
he continued to kill, and he was getting away with it.
Yeah.
He
So
was
that does nothing but embolden someone like that.
right.
Like,
So if you can kill somebody, because he said like he had murdered that girl like a whole
mm-hmm.
year later, or I'm sorry, a whole year
Before.
previous.
Mm-hmm.
The fact that you kill somebody and you just kind of hanging around, just living life for an entire year or more, because we don't know who else he might have killed.
Right. And living like a family life at that.
Right. You're not living in seclusion. You're not living in, you're not a recluse. You don't live alone.
Mm-hmm.
You have a family.
Yeah. Right. So that also, I feel like when you hear stories about people who are murderers and diagnosed sociopaths having families, I feel like that is a calculated decision in terms of protection, because nobody's going to suspect the father of three who coaches a little league team of being a slasher.
Right. And it reminds me of how we sometimes can romanticize people who are killers. Oh, well, he was a nice guy, or he was a normal guy. He had a family, he had a job, he had this, he had that. And there's almost something alluring to people about the idea of being with somebody who could potentially murder them.
And also,
that is absolutely outrageous. That's outrageous to me.
And I think it's also the ego boost of, I wasn't a victim, so I'm special.
Right. Right.
And that's a whole nother can of worms.
It is.
So like this was a hard case to research, just from not even just like the details of it, but the lack of details.
Absolutely. And
because they had such little to work on, and a child being killed in such a heinous way, like to think that their family, for whatever reason, she's just gone.
Right. So
may not have even heard of a Jane Doe in St. Louis if she is from the South.
Right. So let's assume that Vernon Brown killed little Jane Doe. My thought is, if nobody reported her missing, what would be his connection to her? Like, did he live? Because if she died around the time he was married to this woman, who does he know who she belonged to?
Right. Was she a kid that 8, 11?
Because she wasn't a baby. She was like a prepubescent child.
Yeah.
So she's a big kid. She's a big kid. And so there's no missing report on this big kid.
Like, was she visiting family during that time and they were scared to say something? Did they know? And Vernon was just that imposing of a figure that they said nothing? Were they scared to, like, there's so many. Was this a case of trafficking during the early 80s? I don't, like, there's so many questions this leaves open. and the lack of evidence, it leaves like this huge gaping hole.
Now, where was Vernon Brown from? Was he from any of the places where Jane Doe was from?
It did not say. His story started out when he went to prison in Indiana.
Okay. I'm curious also about how when people are released from prison after having, committed such a heinous crime like molestation, rape, things like that. When they're released from jail, I'm curious about when they go to start a new life. Because, it's legal for you to change your name.
Yeah.
So my thought is, did he legally change his name to something else? Was that a legit situation where he went and actually filed papers to change his name? Or did he just assume a new identity and just start calling himself something else? Because that matters too. And if after you changed your name and you have this new name and you go and you get married, well, that's now a legal document.
And that is a huge question. I'm not sure since I've never been married or attempted to, I don't know what documentation you're supposed to bring for a marriage license to get a marriage license. So I don't know if it's like, hey, I'm Vernon Brown. That's my name, and I want to marry this woman. And can you sign?
Yeah. So when you get married, depending on the jurisdiction, you obviously have to have some sort of ID, birth certificate, social security card, things like that. And then after you get married, you get a new social security number.
Okay.
Yeah. So you go down to the social security office and say, this is my new name. I am, I'm no longer Nikki Smith. I'm Nikki Jones now. Mm-hmm. And this is my marriage certificate. So I need to fill out a new application for a new social security card and all of that. So I'm wondering, for him and people like him, if back then it was possible or easy in the 80s. Because, when this happened, I was like a year old. So, I'll be 36 on Saturday. So I wasn't around back then. Right. So I don't know how easy it was back then to just hop into a new life and just live. And also, this is happening. He lived in places that were like metro areas. It wasn't like he lived in the middle of nowhere, Mississippi or something like that, where you can get away with stuff like that.
So it's weird because I'm assuming he was able to take on this persona of someone that is able to be trusted. Mm-hmm. And not even just because he had a wife and stepkids, but a little girl walking down the street sees this man telling her to come in. Kids don't always, think of the dangers of things, but usually kids can tell when something is off.
Mm-hmm, yeah.
How do you know, maybe she usually came over to play with his kids, mm-hmm. or something like that. There's something about him that allows him to not have to hide in the shadows.
Yeah. It's very strange.
And I think we do a disservice when we think about, sociopaths and murderers and rapists and child molesters as these creepy people that live in the basement and have no social skills, because for the most part that's it's not right. Sociopathy isn't it's a lack of understanding empathy, human emotions, and stuff like that. But there's also a masking that goes on where they know what is quote unquote right by societal terms, and they do it up until a point until it no longer benefits them. Mm-hmm. So we see all the time. There's freaking documentaries and movies made about serial killers that are talking about, they were just so handsome and they were irresistible and just charming. And for the most part, that's how people like this operate.
Mm-hmm. I'm worried about what happens to these girls who go missing and there's nobody's looking for them. Nobody's asking about them. There's no missing persons report. An interesting note that I noticed about the St. Louis Jane Doe is that she had evidence of spina bifida.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm wondering if it affected the way that she walked. Like, was it noticeable in her? Was she targeted because she had a disability?
Mm-hmm.
Did her parents throw her away because they said that she was well nourished? So somebody was caring for her.
Right. So that is the disconnect there, where you can tell someone is caring about her and taking care of her, but nobody's seemingly looking for her. That's one of the things that like isn't sitting right with me, because there's no reason for that.
So it also makes me wonder if whoever was caring for her, if they had, like it said that they suspected maybe a family member did something because that this particular child had never been reported missing.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder if that's true. Like, let's assume that the family has something to do with it. If it was because they felt like she was going to be a burden because she had spina bifida, or if they felt like, the older she gets, the more of a responsibility she's going to be. The very gross and heinous way that she was killed, what happened to her body before she died, like all of those things are ridiculous. And I can't help but wonder, like where they tested her bones for where she came from. I'm wondering, because they didn't do that initially because they didn't have that technology.
Right.
So what if she was reported missing from one of those states and nobody in Missouri knew about that?
That too. Then there's also the possibility that she was within a residence at some point. Like she was sent off to be in a residence, and during those times, they weren't exactly good places to be.
You mean like a group home or something?
Either a group home, a state-run hospital, something like that.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I got you.
And one, record keeping wasn't great. Also, there weren't a lot of advocacy groups for the safety and treatment of people with disabilities at that time. So there's so many different possibilities of where she was, where she came from, where she was going, and what could have happened to her. But there's so few pieces of evidence that can make those ideas conclusive. So like this is one of those things, one of the cases where I think it upsets me the most, because A, I can't put a real name on her.
Right.
And B, there's just so many questions that are going to pretty much always go unanswered unless someone says something.
Because so what I'm thinking is, if you have, mold growing where there is a wound, mold grows within a week. So if she was, murdered a week before she was found, that doesn't tell you anything about how long she'd been missing.
Right.
But if she was well cared for and, she looked like she was otherwise healthy and somebody was caring for her, like the nail polish, did the killer put the nail polish on her, or was she already
kept
wearing
somewhere for a period of time beforehand?
Right.
There's just so much to this.
And her body was moved there. So that doesn't really tell you where she was even killed. There's so much about these types of investigations that I notice are just, they seem to be poorly done. And it makes me wonder and question law enforcement. Did y'all do a shoddy job because she was Black? I
Like,
can't help but wonder that.
at times, like, for most of the cases, I absolutely feel like that. This one was just, it surprised me in the lengths they went.
Absolutely. True. I'll give them that.
After they said, after they figured out she was, quote unquote, too young to be a prostitute, because they were definitely ready to be like, oh, she was a prostitute and murdered, blah, blah, blah. But when they found that she was a child, they didn't bury her until 10 months later. They went so far as to find psychics. They reopened the case twice within 20 years. Like,
and I'm wondering now, one of the detectives who was on the case, the one who passed away during the investigation, I wonder if he was the one pressing to find something, because it appeared that he had a record of having closed cases. Right. And I know that when you're a detective, that's important to you. You don't want to have a lot of open cases or cold cases. Like, your job is literally to solve these cases.
Right.
So I wonder if he had something to do with making sure he could, press that forward and make sure that they got some answers.
Yeah.
But I can't help but look at some of these like strange details, and be curious about how little attention is actually paid to some of these cases that are cold and unsolved for years and years and years. I mean, I know this one is odd because, like, she was decapitated. There was no head found. That is outrageous to me. And she could be anywhere, and she could be from anywhere. Like, that's a wide net of places that they said she could be from. So I can't help but be really concerned about the parts that are not mentioned in this investigation.
Yeah.
Like, for instance, did you look in other states and find out, what is your missing persons reports say from like the month that she went missing, or the month that she, was found dead?
Yeah. They did look at missing cases from a few other states, but the technology at that time, and then the disconnect between police departments and states and all of that, I'm sure they didn't get back everything.
Right.
So,
well, I mean, it looks like it's going to remain an unsolved case because most of the people involved are now deceased, and this was 37 years ago. But hopefully something like this never happens again. We have advanced technology and things like that can help us solve cases a little bit faster. And now everybody's got, there's cameras everywhere. So there really should be.
Are keeping closer tabs on folks who have been to prison for
absolutely
such crimes. So hopefully this prevents a lot of future cases like this. But this one, it definitely it weighed heavy on me.
Yeah, I can see that. Well, thank you for doing the research for this and writing this all out, because this was a very complicated case, very emotional. Thank you again to Jackson Janine, who is one of our followers on Facebook, who has asked us to cover this case. And good job, Asa. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Black Girl Missing podcast is researched, written, and produced by us. It is a labor of love by 3 concerned Black women who want justice for missing Black girls. Today's episode was written by Asa and produced by the Full Service Radio team. You can find us wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. Be sure to follow us on social media. Our Twitter is BLK Girl Missing. Facebook is Black Girl Missing Pod. Instagram, Black Girl Missing Podcast. And you can visit our website for more information about each case, blackgirlmissingpod.com. And you can email us at blackgirlmissingpodcast@gmail.com with any tips, feedback, or names of girls that you would like for us to look into. All righty. See you.
All right. Bye.